go ahead and get started then. I'd like to call this meeting of the Assembly Legislative Committee to order at 10:52. We were scheduled until 11:50 today, although I doubt we will need all of that time. So first item of business, let's start with member introductions in the room.
Erin Baldwin Day.
Anna Brawley.
Zach Johnson, and I do not believe we have any members on the phone. So with that, let's just go ahead and dive into business. Does not look like we have our state lobbyist on the phone, so I think we can skip over item 4A. And I think folks this meeting will talk about recent assembly and administration visits to Juneau and feedback we got from the legislature. And so I think with that, I'd like to turn to Policy Director, Mr. Klauda, to start the conversation off.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the big activities to report on to this committee from the last month or so are that the mayor and chief of staff went down to Juneau on the 11th and 12th of February and also brought the port director, Terry Umatum, with them too, and held two pretty full packed days with meetings with Anchorage legislators and to go to support the legislative program and especially to talk about the Port of Alaska and the progress that's being made there with construction starting, this summer, and also the ongoing need to provide funding for port modernization. So they had good conversations about that. Interested in the possibility of a general obligation bond. And many other topics as well. And then I went down last week along with several members of the body to the Alaska Municipal League conference, and also had several meetings with legislators. Same kinds of issues. I found it to be really productive. I know that members Brawley, Baldwin Day will have probably more to say about that. But we are, of course, watching several bills that are active right now. And also working, another thing I wanted to mention related to our legislative program, working with Representative Mina on one of the items, which is about the rates for general relief for assisted living. So she is working on drafting some legislation, working with myself and with Thea Agnew-Bemben in the mayor's office and that was something, a connection that Member Brawley helped bring about and facilitate as well. So we're hopeful that some legislation can advance there that would help to make that program more viable for assisted living in a way that would help create more housing opportunities for people that need more complex care. We are watching a few different bills that are active. Representative Colomb has a bill on property tax exemptions, and this is something that AML is tracking really closely. The kind of thrust and spirit of the bill is something that would allow local governments to have a lot more control over the optional exemptions to property taxes. So something that I think generally local governments would like. There are some specifics to the bill that may need to be sort of worked through. It does have a low threshold where for requiring exemptions to go to voters if they're more than $75,000 each, which could be complicated for some uses of property tax exemptions. There's a bill too that SB 218 that relates to taxes on electrical co-ops. It would basically eliminate that tax, which is a very small amount statewide. It's about $3 million, but Anchorage has been getting about over 1 million of the 3 million that's collected, and so it's actually something that would cost us about $1 million a year if it were to pass. And so that's something we are talking to legislators about and making sure that they know about that. Every little bit of cut that we get, is a problem for us. And there's a lot of those that have accumulated over the years. And then, of course, we're also watching HB 136, which is Representative Kopp's bill related to railroad easements too, which has some kind of complications for AWU, for utility access, and for other work that we may want to do, as well as the municipality. So those are a couple of highlights for folks. Happy to take any questions or continue on with the discussion.
Not seeing any. Oh, Member Baldwin Day.
Thanks, Mr. Klauda. What is Rep. Kopp's bill number? The railroad easements.
That is HB 136.
HB 136. Okay. Is Rep. Coulombe's property tax exemption bill the same or similar to the legislation that Rep. Gray is carrying of a similar nature?
Through the chair to member Baldwin Day. Actually, those are they're kind of interesting. They're two pretty separate efforts that are, I think, trying to achieve some of the same kinds of goals. The difference is that Representative Gray's bill adds a couple of categories of optional exemption that municipalities could enact, whereas Representative Coulombe's bill is designed to basically hand over the power of forming all kinds of optional exemptions to local governments. Subject to voter approval. So they're in some ways kind of pointing in the same direction, but going about it a bit differently.
Thank you.
Member Brawley.
Yeah, well, first, I guess I'll just disclose, I used to work for Representative Gray. I left employment on January 9th. So, and I actually didn't do a lot of work on HB 13, but that's the optional exemptions bill, and the Assembly passed a resolution in support of it. So another kind of nuance with that bill, Gray's bill, HB 13 versus Coulombe's bill, HB 291, I believe, is really the question about, if it's over $75,000 of value and it needs to go to voters. That was a big discussion in House Community and Regional Affairs Committee. I know Representative Ruffridge in particular had concerns about, is the Assembly just going to do what it wants? Essentially, that was the concern versus sending it to the people. But one of the questions I think that we've raised about the implications of Coulombe's bill is, 75,000 limit makes sense for something like the residential exemption, where it's a literal dollar amount that you're getting exempted from your property value. But we also use exemptions for various economic development projects. So you could have an exemption that is, maybe $1 million if it's a very major project and it's foregoing those property taxes. And that could be per year. It could be total value, right? There's lots of different ways to measure it. So I think that's really the question, is if it's over 75,000, what does that just mean? Essentially everything goes to voters? What if one project is 50,000 and the other one is 2.5 million, right? I mean, that's probably a very large spread for what we're talking about. But do both of those go? Does that impact individual projects, right? There's kind of questions like that where the logic applies to some types of exemptions, and it really starts to break down when you look at the others. And there's others certainly in current law that other communities are using for, energy rebates or things like that. So anyway, so that's really a question is, okay, if you step outside of what you think of as the residential exemption or the senior exemption, and you look at how these are used, what does that actually mean? So, and that's a question I posed to AML as well.
Certainly merits consideration. Mr. Collada, did you have more?
Yes, yeah, and I think that's a really key question. We've used things like the economic development incentive under state statute. That's how that was the basis for doing our housing incentives, and those would be hard to formulate, if they needed to go to voters each time, right? Or to create the category of exemption. So that would be challenging. There's maybe one other thing, Mr. Chairman, I should mention is that all the news about ASD's budget and the meeting last night, definitely something that, the administration, the mayor is very concerned about the state of education funding in Anchorage and statewide. And so we are looking at ways that we can lend our voice to support for more funding for education with the legislature. So we'll have more to share with the body on that, I think, very soon. But that's something that's of grave concern to us. The state funding formula is still, even with the change last year, which was a very positive change with the increase in the BSA, it still comes far short of the actual need. And so I think that's really on display for us with the cuts that ASD has had to pass. So just another piece to mention.
All right, thanks for that update. Kind of sticking with this item, I think members Baldwin Day and Brawley were also down there, and certainly don't have to chime in if you don't want to. But since you also had the opportunity to meet with folks from legislature, if you had any takeaways or particular projects you're interested in, or bills, I guess more accurately. Member Brawley?
Yeah, I had some good meetings, some of which were with my legislators just catching up. But I guess a few things I'll flag. One is on Monday, there's a House Labor and Commerce Committee on the cost of healthcare. And so I've reached out, and it was supposed to happen this Monday. It's happening next Monday. So I plan to testify. And of course, it's not on a specific thing that we've taken a position on, but I'll speak to the impacts of rising healthcare costs, immunities, self-insured. And then of course, just as a person, right, we know that healthcare is really freaking expensive in this state. So, so that's something on the radar. In terms of other meetings, I had some follow-ups that I did just individually, with folks. I think, yeah, the mood down there is really trying to make all the budget pieces work, and knowing there's a lot of headwinds there. And of course, just the concern about, regardless of what we do, the legislature, what is the governor going to do? And so it feels like, I think we should temper expectations for sure. But there was some discussion about possible one-time school funding. So certainly not another BSA increase. But I think it all depends on the spring revenue forecast, which will come out in March. And then I think that's when they'll know kind of more, with a little more certainty, what budget room they have to play with. And then I will also say I sat in on a very interesting Senate Transportation Committee meeting, talking about walkability in Anchorage, and appreciated Senator Tobin and Senator Keel, and I think it was mostly those two, just with a lot of spirited questions to DOT about pedestrian safety and things like, what we're calling the Minnesota cheese grater, those barriers that they're putting up to basically channelize, which means restrict access to roads. There's one planned over across from Merrill Field, for example, a lot of discussion there. So otherwise, so I would say transportation, definitely a huge hot topic, not my specific area, but I made a point to connect all those folks with Member Baldwin Day. So, and others working on that area in more fully. So anyway, but yeah, otherwise it was a good visit. Thanks.
Thanks. I wanted to bring up with this committee to kind of get the temperature in the room relating to defined benefits, which has long been part of our legislative program. And it looks like there is, in fact, some optimism that we might see legislation passed this year. And so in some of the conversations I had with legislators down there, and in particular, Senator Giesel suggested that something like a assembly resolution could be considered, beneficial and of use to them. And I think that's a project that merits consideration, but I figured this committee would be the best place to kind of put that out there and kind of see if people have thoughts or feedback on that concept. Member Raleigh.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm happy to work on that, or happy to have someone else work on it, and I'm happy to vote for it. But I'll know, we were just looking before the meeting that we, before I was on the body, the Assembly passed a resolution in support of the prior bill. I think it was HB 22. And so just to note, like, that's something, not that we shouldn't do this, we should say we are consistently on record, probably even before that. And then to just reassert our support for, in this case, HB 78, which, I think has passed the House at this point. So working on that. I will also note, actually, during the AML meeting, there was a very interesting and spirited discussion between Representative Kopp and Senator Stedman. And Senator Stevens that's sitting there, not in the middle of them, but kind of conceptually in the middle of them, about kind of anyway, it was interesting just to hear the debate. So we know that Senate Finance is going to be the hardest stop in that bill's progress. But I think Kopp did a good job of, really talking about, it was just an interesting back and forth of what happened about 20 years ago with the pension, or maybe 10 years ago. And, just the different flavors of that discussion. So,
Ms. Ross.
Thank you. I have a question on that one. It's really been sold as the state finally figured out a way to make it more financially feasible. But then at one point I heard that the way they made it feasible is shift all the burden to the municipalities. And so I'm just wondering if we've done any research about how it would affect the bottom line for the municipalities' budget.
Mr. Chair, through the chair, I think that there are definitely some variables there that, there's the required contribution from local governments, right? Which is capped at 22%. And I think it's how much of that cap we are called upon to contribute. So there are some unknowns there. There definitely is the potential of raising the contribution that local governments have to make. I don't think it's quite accurate that it's shifting the whole burden onto local governments. It's really about that share between state and local governments and what that exact mix ends up being, which is not fully determined or fleshed out. So I did talk at AML to some local governments, that we're pretty concerned about that, what that cost ends up being. I think that for the administration, we think that the value of defined benefit pensions is such that we would, of course, we have to continue to advocate for ourselves with the state, and with any future changes, but we think that it is worth moving that direction anyway.
All right, thanks. I'll just note for the record that Member McCormick joined us at 11:06. Just shoot me a text if you want to get in the queue. I guess on this item, Member Baldwin Day, or on another item.
Definitely would be interested in a resolution in support of defined benefits legislation at the state level. Also wanted to raise two bills that I think are of particular interest to Anchorage. HB 184 and the Senate companion SB 14, which includes language to expand the scope of ADA, the Alaska Industrial Economic Development Authority. Did I put all of those words in the right order? To include funding for workforce housing. And I think both of those pieces of legislation have pretty significant implications for housing supply in Anchorage. So I would like to work on a resolution of that. Of HB 184 in particular. I think that's a bit farther along in the process and will likely make it over to the Senate side of the House before SB 14 really moves. So that's a project I would like to pick up and would be happy to have others join me in that effort. I know this isn't technically a rules committee, but wanted to put that on the record that I think it's really important for Anchorage to be locally in support of that expansion of ADA's authority.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? All right, I think we have a couple things to work on and more to track. I'll just mention as well, in the conversations that I had around the potential for a GeoBond, and we have made our top priority in the legislative program that if it happens, the port should be included in it. And I got the sense from the conversations I've had, and I'd be curious if anyone had different takeaways, is that there was recognition of the importance of the PART project, but certainly did not give me a sense that we could take for granted that it would make it into a GeoBond. I think there's going to be a lot of competing priorities. And so I think if we start to see something come together, that I think we probably need to consider how to be effective advocates, because again, it is part of the legislative program. And I think most of us in this room kind of agree that we would very much want to see it in the mix. So just something for us to track. With that, moving down the agenda, under the item 5, we have legislative priorities for legislative program. I think we've legislative programs have been adopted, and then we've been discussing it. Budget items for 2026, I think we kind of have a sense of what the state fiscal situation looks like, and I don't know if there's any members who want to chime in further on that. Member Brawley?
Yeah, I'll add another item that we typically talk about and is still TBD is community assistance. And that's in our budget. And typically we don't know what that's going to look like in January or before January. And so I don't know what the assumption is for our FY26 budget, but we'll take it up in April. I think right now, what I remember in the governor's revised budget, which dropped while we were there, it was funded at 18 million, which is below, I think 30 is usually the maximum where everybody gets the payout, et cetera. And so 18 is below where we would get our full payout. In fact, I don't remember how the formula works. We may not even get that much at that level, but there was interest from multiple legislators in increasing that and kind of fully funding it. And I know there's been discussion in the past where it gets forward funded. And so basically the fund is fully capitalized for future years. I don't think they're going to go there. But that seems positive for us, because I think historically we've gotten between 3 and 4 million in the last few years, and then we haven't kind of known or been able to make that assumption until first quarter. So, so that's just something to track. But also we know, I mean, it's the very small percentage compared to what it used to be. And so, so we don't bank on it being too large either way. But that's just another piece that we'll look at from the budget perspective.
All right, thank you. Member Baldwin Day.
Yeah, I appreciate that Mr. Clauda spoke about this earlier, and this isn't, directly in relationship to the municipal budget, but with respect to the ASD budget, it really sounded like there was not yet a legislative mechanism in place to really provide financial support to school districts at this juncture. Which is troubling, to be honest. I sat in on a joint education committee hearing in which folks from all over the state, literally every region, I think, was represented, mayors and legislators and folks connected with school boards, spoke about the really dire challenges that education funding is presenting statewide. And so I am concerned that we don't have a clear mechanism. There's not been a bill brought forward or really any substantive action from either finance committee with respect to education. So I'm grateful that that's something that we're tracking. I'm curious if there's anything further that we can do. Mr. Cloud, I know you mentioned that there was some rumblings happening on the administrative side of the house, but I think that's certainly something I would be interested in exploring as we're discussing budgetary issues. Two of the 3 elementary schools that were scheduled for closure and reallocation in fiscal year 27 are in my district, both Campbell STEM and Lake Otis. And one of those will be declared excess and one will be reappropriated for a charter school. And I'm really, really concerned that there doesn't appear to be a clear sense of urgency at the legislative level, state legislative level, to address this. And I think it's pretty clear that barring state legislative action, we're going to continue to see really significant cuts to educational programs in Anchorage and really around the state, which I think we all know is untenable. So not sure what the mechanism looks like for that, but I would be very interested in opening that conversation or being a part of that conversation as we continue to think about how things in Anchorage get funded and how essential services get funded. So yeah, thank you.
Mr. Cloud.
Yes, to the chair, to Member Baldwin Day, we don't have necessarily in the administration a clear sense. We are having some conversations, so we may get a little further with this. In fact, even today internally, but of what exactly the architecture of a new program needs to look like. Is it a BSA increase? Is it something else? We aren't exactly sure what that should look like. But I think that the bottom line is really clear that there needs to be more funding. We have fallen way behind on supporting our schools, I think, at the state level, and we do need to do what we can to drum up some urgency on the matter. And so we have talked to legislators about that who have encouraged us to elevate our voices. And so you'll be seeing more from us about that. So we completely agree with the sentiment, and the mayor did speak at the school board meeting yesterday, and a big part of her message was that the cuts that are on the table that are in fact very harmful. We have very little choice at the local level, between us and the school district about that, and that it really is something that has to be adjusted at the state level. There's really no other way.
One of the things I heard mentioned at the Capitol was just some conversation about the fact that the base student allocation also covers facilities, and historically we didn't always fund using the BSA. We used educational units, which took into account buildings and actual facilities, and so there was some conversation about developing a base facilities allocation separate and apart from a base student allocation to help in a very direct way with facilities maintenance and educational infrastructure, essentially, and allowing the base student allocation to continue to fund student-facing services, but for a facilities allocation to be brought into the conversation, which seemed like a helpful adjustment. And I don't know what the appetite looks like for a legislator or a committee to pick up something like that. But I could see that being extremely beneficial for ASD, particularly since I think we have something like $1.5 million billion, in deferred maintenance at ASD, and having facilities focused support would alleviate some of the financial burden and allow for some funds to be redirected towards teaching positions and student-facing supports and things like that. So that could be an avenue. I don't know that that's a mechanic that's been floated before, but if it has, it would be interesting to chase down and understand if that's something that we could suggest.
Sure. Through the chair, Member Baldwin Day. That I concur. I think that seems like one pathway that could be really worth taking a close look at.
I think I'll add, we did not include education funding in the mini legislative program this year, but it's really not to say that we can't take a position on it. I think sort of maybe the question for us to chew on is if there is a desire for us to sort of adopt official position through something like an assembly resolution. What does it look like and what does it call for? I think it was last year, possibly the year before, that we adopted a resolution that had a specific amount we recommended that the BSA be increased by, right? So that's one, I think, pretty straightforward way to go about it. I think given the sense that it's really pretty vague, what the legislature is considering this year, I think it's always helpful when we have a specific piece of legislation or a specific mechanism that we can say we are supporting this, and it doesn't feel like there's really that level of clarity right now. So I think it's just something for us to contemplate if we want to craft something like a resolution. But I'll say I agree with Member Baldwin Day that I think school funding is incredibly important, and I think it, from my perspective, would make sense for the muni to consider taking a position. It's just an interesting question of how and where we do that, and also there may be a timing piece to consider with that as well. Member Brawley.
Yeah, I think probably also helpful just to note we have multiple tools that we can use. So obviously resolution is one, and it does typically is in support of something. I think in theory it could oppose something, right? But that's usually it's used as a positive that we want this to happen. I think the point about being specific, if we just said we support school funding or, whatever, that we probably want to narrow that in. But the other items that folks have at their disposal too is members can send letters, right? We have letterhead, especially if it is like a regional item, or you could co-sign a letter with some legislators. Obviously you'd be advocating to legislators in that case. But I know that happens at the federal level as well. We don't typically have all members sign a letter like that because it runs into Open Meetings Act issues, but we've also done things like authorizing, for example, the chair to sign a letter on behalf of, or, something like that. And then I think also working with the mayor's office, you all have your own tools at your disposal, whether it's formal statements in writing or, advocacy or directing the lobbyist. And so just to say there's multiple kind of ways to get at that, and it just depends. So for example, if it was something coming from the district representing constituents, that's something that it's not an either or, but you could send a letter that says, signed with Member Rivera, for example, we're strongly concerned about this, we're representing our area. So anyway, just to put those other options on the table as well.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else looking to get in the queue? Not seeing anyone. Moving on, is there anyone here for audience participation? I know we have at least one person on the phone from the public. Not hearing anything.
Chair, I have nothing.
Yes, Mr. Ferguson, if you'd like to participate in audience participation, you have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
I'd just like to thank you all for going down and representing us very well from Anchorage to there. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Appreciate the sentiment. Do not believe we have anyone else, so last call for audience participation. Not seeing anything, so with that, appreciate everyone's time coming down here today. Certainly, I think we have some follow-up actions to consider. And with that, I will say at 11:21, we will be adjourned.
Thank you.